Welcome to the 76th episode of the Jewish Drinking Show. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan. I'm very excited to welcome first-time guest to the show, Rabbi Noah Ferro.
Good to be here.
Awesome. Right. For those less familiar with Rabbi Ferro, he is right here in Cincinnati along with me. He is the rabbi at Northern Hills Synagogue, as well as a 2017 graduate of Hebrew Union College, also right here in the Queen City of the West, Cincinnati. So I'm excited because this is literally a text that I think, A, is not one that I've given a lot of thought to previously, even though it gets a lot, people spill lots of ink about it. They talk about it, especially when it comes to Tisha B'Av time, really, but also really fascinated to be talking about it in this context because it's typically, I'm pretty sure if you ask 99 people, 100 people, almost no one would say this is a drinking text or has literally anything to do with drinking. When you had sort of put it out there about this text, I saw this on Facebook, and I looked into it again. I was shocked that there's drinking in the story, and we're here now.
Right.
Here we are. So, Rabbi Ferro, do you mind providing just a snippet of an overview of what this story is?
The 30,000-foot view is it's a rabbinic story about the destruction of the temple and how it was caused by sinat chinam, or by a grudge, a hatred between two people. There's a banquet, a feast that features in the story. So that's our drinking connection. Awesome.
So that's a great departure point for us to start off with. This is a drinking text, lest anybody think otherwise. As Rabbi Ferro mentioned, it's in the Babylonian Talmud. It is this story that really is what sets things in motion according to the rabbinic telling of the destruction of the Second Temple. And it really starts off at a feast. So we have this Kamtza and Bar Kamtza piece, and so according to the Talmud, they say, well, Jerusalem was destroyed really because of this. Now, it's not literally because of this, but this is the thing that sets things in motion. And it all starts off at one particular drinking and eating event.
The Gemara explains, Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza. This is as there was a certain man whose friend was named Kamtza, and whose enemy was named Bar Kamtza. So this is our guy Hahu Gavra. I like to pretend that that's a proper name. Of course, it's not really. It's just a man. We don't have his name, but we know that he had these two people in his life, Kamtza the friend and Bar Kamtza the enemy. He once made a large feast and said to his servant, "Go and bring me my friend Kamtza." The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy Bar Kamtza. So, not off to an auspicious start here.
You know, one of the interesting things that I came across, this is not a common name. Neither Kamtza nor Bar Kamtza. They are not names in the Talmud. And actually, it's an Aramaic Kamtza for locust. And so it's an interesting thing to even just to literally play around with verbally of what is the verbal resonance. There's locusts come and destroy. And even though we don't know anything about Kamtza and Bar Kamtza, they could be totally fine guys and upstanding men. And at the same time, they start the downfall of just things being destroyed, like locusts.
Yep. Okay. That's an interesting thought. Yeah, I actually hadn't thought about that. That's a good point. All right.
That's the pre-meal stuff. He said, go bring me Kamtza, but instead he got him Bar Kamtza. And Hahu Gavra, this guy, is not in good terms with Bar Kamtza.
Right. The man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar Kamtza sitting at the feast. The host, Hahu Gavra, said to Bar Kamtza, "That man is the enemy of that man." So this is something we find sometimes in the Talmud where they use these like distanced language to talk about themselves within stories, especially. It's a little confusing, but okay, we're enemies, meaning you are my enemy. What then do you want here? Arise and leave. So he's now uninvited Bar Kamtza. Bar Kamtza said to him, "Since I've already come, let me stay, and I'll give you money for whatever I eat and drink. Just don't embarrass me," as our Rav Steinsaltz tells us here.
And by the way, that's the important part for our purposes.
Right. I'll give you money for whatever I eat and drink. So he's eating and drinking.
Drinking is the most important part of the story.
Right?
We wouldn't be here if it was
my tea.
Drinking in the story.
Right. And yeah, so he's clearly saying, he wants to turn it not into a feast, not into a big party that's being thrown, but rather more of a pay as you go buffet. That's his goal here. Let me stay, but don't embarrass me. The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Bar Kamtza said to him, "I'll give you money for half the feast." He's willing to pay for the half of the cost of the entire shindig. Just don't send me away. The host said to him, "No, you must leave." And so Bar Kamtza says, "I will give you money for the entire feast. Just let me stay." The host said to him, "No, you must leave." Finally, the host took Bar Kamtza by his hand, stood him up, and took him out. So that's our whole banquet scene.
Which, by the way, is pretty crazy. That last scene sticks with me. Of literally, you go to your enemy and you grab him by the hand and take him out of your house. Like you're clearly upset. Like this is
right.
He doesn't have his like bodyguards whomever toss him out. Not that he has bodyguards. It's probably just someone's house, and yet he has to like grab him and take him out. And it's interesting because there's this escalation of, I'll pay for, like, I know you hate me, but like I'm here. Let me pay for, like, if you really don't want to be sponsoring my eating and drinking, I'll pay you. I'll recompense you. I'll pay for half of it. I'll co-sponsor this party. And it's also interesting that we don't know why Hahu Gavra, why this guy hates him. Why is he his enemy? At the time, imagine there is something to be said for eating and, of course, drinking and having people that you want to engage in fellowship in these activities of eating and drinking together with people that you want to break bread and share wine with, right? You want to have a good relationship with people. And if someone you can't stand, like that's going to like literally offend your own sensibilities as a person. Like we don't know if he had wronged him in business. He just doesn't like him. Like there could be actually basis for him not liking him, but it is really intense. He won't even allow him to pay or even pay for the whole party. He just wants him out.
Yeah. So clearly, I mean, it's intense. Like bad blood. Whether it's like you said, you want to have a good relationship with people. If you're eating and drinking with them, there's a certain level of conviviality that you can engage in with people. But I'm also thinking, if someone's your enemy, you don't want to let your guard down around them. You don't want to be sitting there, chatting with your buddies. You might let something slip. You might say something that someone's going to use against you. Like I could think of any number of reasons if you've got kind of an adversarial relationship with somebody, why you wouldn't want them in this kind of a context. But again, like you said, we also don't know if there's some deeper, wrong, some kind of a crime or a wrong that was committed from one to the other, at some previous time.
Right. And we don't know if we don't have the background, right? We could create the midrashim around that or the narrative expansions, but whatever it is, there's I will say this Bar Kamtza fellow, he's cool with taking part in the conviviality. It's this guy, the host, that's not happy with Bar Kamtza.
Okay, so I mean, maybe that would tell us, we would be conjecturing, but maybe that would tell us something like Bar Kamtza, maybe he did something wrong, and he's saying like now, like, no, forget about the thing that I did wrong. Let it be water under the bridge. Let's move on. It's possible. It's a plausible understanding of things, especially because, based on what's coming later, we're going to be likely to think poorly of Bar Kamtza based on his upcoming actions.
That's true. Up until now, Bar Kamtza seems to be fine. He doesn't harbor ill will necessarily to the host, and he's even not only willing to pay for his stuff, but he's willing to, to go up half and even for the whole party. He's like, I'm here. Like, why do you got to bother me? But you're right. Ultimately, we get a different perspective of his character as the story progresses.
He's thrown out. After having been cast out of the feast, Bar Kamtza said to himself, since the sages were sitting there, the Rabbanan were sitting there and did not protest the actions of the host, though they saw how he humiliated me, learn from it, they were content with what he did. I will therefore go and inform against them to the king. He went and said,
I'm gonna pause here, which is like, this is the literal definition of that escalated quickly.
yes.
It goes from, well, I got kicked out. There happen to be rabbis there, so they're 100% on board. And now informing them to the king is a whole other thing. Like,
Right.
I'm happy with them. They sided with this guy and not me.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely a quick escalation. You could have been, let me talk to them aside. Like, let me pull a couple of rabbis aside and say, hey guys, what gives? But that's not what happens. Instead, it's, I'm going to go and tell the king. And what does he say? He went and said to the emperor, the Jews have rebelled against you, not the rabbis, not this guy, Hahu Gavra, who's holding a feast. All of the Jews rebelled against you.
Exponentially makes it even, like, just really turning it up. Who said, right? Like, it's really escalating ridiculously quickly.
Right. So the emperor said to him, who says this is the case? Bar Kamtza said to him, go and test them. Send them an offering to be brought in honor of the government, and see whether they will sacrifice it. The part where I have to jump in and say, sometimes we're straining credibility here a little bit, because we already said, right, we're not so sure. Like, that escalation, that was severe, that was big. And then the emperor says, and give me something to know this by, and he says, oh, well, here you go. And the emperor doesn't question it. He doesn't take another, say, okay, well, I'll take this under consideration. He says, no, okay, well, then go. And what happens? The emperor went and sent him with a choice 3-year-old calf. While Bar Kamtza was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish on the calf's upper lip, or some say he made the blemish on its eyelids, a place where, according to us, according to the halakha, according to Jewish law, it's a blemish, but according to them, according to Gentile practices, it's not a blemish. Therefore, when Bar Kamtza brought the animal to the temple, the priest wouldn't sacrifice it since it was blemished, but they couldn't. This is according to Rav Steinsaltz's explanation. Since it was blemished, they wouldn't sacrifice it, but couldn't explain it satisfactorily to Gentile authorities, because they would say, no, it's not blemished. Yeah, okay. And again, we have a little credibility problem. I said, because I'm not sure if Bar Kamtza would be my guy. You tell me that there's a problem, I'm going to look for a third party, somebody who's neutral in all this, and have them, deliver the animal. But for our purposes, it was Bar Kamtza.
Which, by the way, going to your earlier point, it's one thing to go to the king or the emperor and say, oh, the rabbis are against you. So the emperor asks you a question, how can I prove it? How can you prove it? And so he, but you're right, he sends him off with this igla tilsa, right? This 3-year-old calf. And he blemishes it. So he knows he's stirring things up. So this Bar Kamtza fellow is already looking, he's not being colored in well. He's not getting,
not well, no.
We can already get a sense from the original host of that party what some of the issues are with this Bar Kamtza fellow. He lacks integrity. And not only does Bar Kamtza lack integrity, but he also is ridiculous. And like he's just saying, let's screw everything. Let's screw everybody over. The rabbis, we're going to crush them. Let's just destroy everything. It's like literally like a scorched earth policy. Like, I'm just unhappy with everything. Let it all burn. And he knows which levers to pull. Like, he's just gonna like destroy everything. He's like, I'm unhappy with the whole rabbinic system. So you know what? Just let it all burn. And I'm gonna make sure it happens. I'm going to go to the powers that be, and I'm going to mess with things along the way.
Right. Yeah, and I think that would point us in a direction if that's how he lives his life. Probably Hahu Gavra is not his only enemy in the world.
Hey, I hope you've been enjoying this episode so far. I wanted to give you a sneak peek into next week's episode featuring Josh Mann discussing the Jews and Booze Facebook group.
I became really involved, as you can see behind me, in like the whiskey community, especially in collecting, and it just, I saw that it was just a really friendly, welcoming community where just a lot of great people were involved, and I became very friendly with people. And one of the things I kept noticing was that there was a whole lot of Goldbergs and Cohens and all the other Jewish names you could think of in these groups.
I hope you enjoyed that sneak peek into next week's episode. I do want to point out that it will be the final episode before taking a summer and fall holidays break before we resume with episodes of the Jewish Drinking Show in October. So there will be a hiatus, but don't worry, there will be more shows to come in the fall. Now back to this episode with Rabbi Ferro.
The sages thought to sacrifice the animal due to maintaining peace with the government. And then Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkula said to them, if we do, people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed on the altar. And then the sages thought to kill him, this Bar Kamtza guy, because he was being such a fill in the blank here, that he would not go and speak against them. Rabbi Zachariah said to them, people will say that one who makes a blemish on sacrificial animals will be killed. So there's some interesting aspects here. They don't want to kill him. They also feel like they should and should not. Like they're weighing up lots of different tensions here. This is another interjection from Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan was the one who kicked things off on 55b of introducing this story, and then he comes back and inserts this piece about the excessive humility of Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas is really what, and he's not saying it was part of the equation. No. This excessive humility literally destroyed our house and burned our sanctuary, exiled from our land. What I found an interesting article. First of all, if anybody's interested in looking more into the story more in depth, there's this really cool, where is it? Here
we go.
Rubenstein article I highly recommend, really good. But one of the ways he translates this is almost because humility gets mentioned numerous times in rabbinic literature and in Talmud, and it's usually it has a positive resonance to it. There's a positive aspect to it. But here it's something that causes incredible destruction, and so he suggests wimpiness.
Yeah, I was going to say meekness.
Yeah, or cowardice even.
Yeah. And our word, it's important to note too, our word here is not anava, but it's invitanuto, right? So this is like this it's not like truth and truthiness, right? It's like you've taken a word and you've made something else out of it. And it's not that he is anav, humble. He's or an invatan. Like he's got this. It's like meek, I think, is a good word. Or wimpy. He's falling back from something.
Yeah,
and so quite there enough, not quite present enough with an action.
And he also shirks leadership responsibility so he says, you know what, let's just, it's that meekness as opposed to standing up and taking responsibility and moving things forward, as opposed to just letting things happen, right? And that's what we see with the rabbis, that this text is, that not only this Rabbi Yochanan text is critical of the inaction of this particular rabbi, but also earlier in the text, it almost was a little bit of an indictment of the rabbis for their inaction. And
they didn't say anything.
They didn't step in between this guy and Bar Kamtza. Like, let Bar Kamtza stay. Like, so that's one of the interesting facets of this. It's really it's really pointing out some of the issues with this inaction on the rabbi's part.
So I want to think about that for just a second. I'm trying to imagine the scene here too, right? Like they're at the banquet. We want to go back to the drinking. They're there having their wine, having their food, and they're having a good time. And somewhere over on the other side of the room, they hear shouting. They see some guy being dragged away by his hand, and there's this expectation from Bar Kamtza, like they're going to do something. They're going to intervene. They've got to step up.
Mm.
And what I wonder is is that a realistic expectation? Like, was it something that would happen? Would we look to the rabbis for that kind of, they would intervene? Like they wouldn't, if you were at a meal with the rabbis, like not just thinking, people today, like I'm at a meal with people, and then they're not sure what to bless and in what order, that kind of a thing. But like the thing that people might worry about is like not just minding their ritual manners, but also like their conduct and how they interact with each other.
Hey there, I hope you've been enjoying this episode so far. There's still more left. I actually just wanted to break in and say, hey, listeners, if you have ideas, if you have suggestions, I'm very open to any ideas you have, whether it's guests, topics, and that's just for the show. I mean, who knows? We could do more things. We could do swag. I'm really open to your ideas, feedback, suggestions. You can email me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. Again, that's drew@jewishdrinking.com, and I'd love to hear from you. All right, now back to the show with Rabbi Ferro.
I like to think of it more as like it could be a dinner. It could be a dinner party. I like to think of it as that way, where people are scattered all this guy's house and somewhere in the corner over there, somewhere over there. It's also interesting, even just on the narrative, that when we see the scene, the way it's described at this guy's party, is that the rabbis aren't even mentioned, right? We don't know. They're basically off screen. We don't even know that there are any rabbis there taking part in that party. It's only in the aftermath Bar Kamtza says, "Oh, the rabbis were okay with it. Like they didn't lift a finger," which is unclear what their response was in the moment. Like they are literally out of the frame. They're out of frame. They're not in the scene. They could be at the party. We don't know what their interactions were, what their thinking was. That, it's interesting because this criticism, this direct piece of criticism by Rabbi Yochanan of Rabbi, what's his name, of Kulas? Of
Zachariah ben Avkulas.
Right. That's a very direct and clearly articulated piece of direct criticism at him. Earlier in the story, Bar Kamtza, and by the way, we don't know that much about Bar Kamtza earlier on in the story. We are kind of more sympathetic then. He's just been tossed out of this party and he's really upset. But his actions later on show why he would be thrown out of parties and not invited in the first place, right? And so that, I think what you were talking about earlier about, what we learned about Bar Kamtza shades, I think thinking back to this of he's just a ridiculous guy. Why should he have an expectation that the rabbis would be there to save him? What are they, the social police? That they, that's not their role, right? How much should there be an expectation that they need to bring peace or foster peace? And how much do they need to be the party police, right? How much is that a reasonable expectation?
That's fair, right? I mean, I think, you could talk, I think, Mean Girls kind of, right? Is sometimes people misbehave and they treat each other badly. And, it's good when there's an adult in the room, metaphorically speaking, right? It's good when there's somebody who can, kind of give a little perspective and say, hey, hang on. I think you're overreacting, or this isn't the right way to move forward. But there's not necessarily an expectation that there's always going to be someone else in the room, and that people have to conduct themselves well on their own. I mean, that's part of the rabbinic enterprise, right? Is educating people morally and bringing them Torah, bringing them a certain level of good conduct. Being able to maintain their own good conduct.
Right. I also wonder how much now I'm going to think about it from a totally different perspective, how justified the rabbis were, right? Because when we first hear about that, we're like, oh man, that's an interesting criticism of Bar Kamtza, of their inaction. They didn't step in as the party police. But at the same time, maybe they knew who he was and they had previous interactions with him and knew how much of a person that it was not worth standing up for. And they believed that he should be thrown out of this party. He wasn't invited. And who knows how he was even behaving at the party. Sure, he might have been eating and drinking, but what was his own personal conduct at that time? Maybe they were okay with it because he was, violating some sort of social conduct rules. We don't know, right? We don't know how he behaved at the party or typically behaved at the party. And so even thinking more sympathetically to the rabbis in action, maybe they were aware of him and were okay with him being tossed out of the party.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's also a possibility. I was going to say, when we talk about this meekness, one thing that I think we didn't really highlight, but maybe it's worth thinking about too, and it could have been part of what was going on with the rabbis of the party too. We don't know because we don't see that described in detail. Mm-hmm. But when Rabbi Yochanan talks about Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas, he says. It was his meekness or his excessive humility. What we actually saw from him was that a thing that I think we see, I can imagine it happening over drinks a lot actually, is you're just having a conversation, you're throwing ideas out there, and you've got this one person at the table who's only shooting them down. Never offers another idea of well, that's not going to work, or here's a problem with that, but here's something else. Here's a different idea of what we could go with. It's simply a matter of saying, yeah, that's not going to work. I'm going to criticize the idea. I'm going to criticize the possible solution, but I'm not going to give you another solution that could work for you. And
so they just don't do anything. They don't accept the sacrifice, and they don't kill.
Right.
And by the way, it's interesting that that those are on par.
Right.
Right. It's one thing not to sacrifice it. Fine. That's a questionable. Like how much. Like it may not be the right thing to do halachically, but maybe from a realpolitik, perspective, that's the right thing to do for self-preservation or sort of national self-preservation. But killing or not killing Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas, I don't know. Like that's an interesting thing, because then, by the way, that is on a much broader scale. Like forgetting about tossing someone out of the party, you are literally tossing them out of life. Right, right. Higher stakes, and Rabbi Yochanan directly criticizes Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas. You should have killed him, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's ambiguous, because maybe all he's saying is the sacrifice. I mean, like we're not sure which piece of it, but you're right. It comes right on the heels of him saying, "Well, you can't kill the guy," and he turns around and says, "And this guy who says you can't kill people, he's our problem."
It's kind of what people say about. Pick your gender, either husbands or wives, but you can't kill.
Can't live with them, can't kill them.
Right, exactly, and that's what this reminds me of. Like that same reminds me of here.
Yeah, it's kind of, again, you talk about things that escalate quickly. It's like,
yes.
So I mean, I think that's sort of something we see here, and we see it in some agadot in other places in the Talmud and throughout rabbinic literature, is that sometimes there's no possibility for another option. So it's like a lot of things are painted in very stark terms and with a lot of extremes. And rather than saying, okay, maybe you could not sacrifice this animal, but you could come back to the emperor and say, very nice, right on very nice embossed paper, "Dear Emperor, thank you so much for this lovely gift.
Yeah.
We're terribly sorry that we can't accept it. We will refund to you the cost of the animal you sent to us. And if you'd like to send us another one to sacrifice, we would gladly accept it."
I also think there's a lack of moral creativity here, and that can also speak to this this wimpiness, this cowardice of Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas, which is, why not do just a quick switcheroo, right? Why, was there so much attention, so many eyeballs? Was it that closely guarded or watched? This Igla Tilsa, this 3-year-old calf, was someone guarding it the whole time? They couldn't have just done a quick switcheroo. And then you would have made the emperor happy or whatever, and then you would have had Bar Kamtza oh, but I blemished it. They're like, shh, yeah, you're right. I don't know. Maybe they were worried about the word getting out that you could offer blemish. There's maybe ways that they could have been a little bit more creative.
Yeah.
In responding to the situation.
Well, and thinking about about the embarrassment to anybody, they could have been a lot more, like a little bit of sleight of hand here. Like, you got a pen that's already got a couple of 3-year-old calves in it, and you introduce this one, and oh, whoops, did we grab the wrong? Oh, we're not sure. I think it's okay. No worries.
Yeah. Also, I wonder, these two things that we're saying, well, Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkulas didn't do. Well, maybe there's a way they could have done this switcheroo, so they could have offered it, would have been happy for the emperor. And I'm not really sure what the basis is for killing Bar Kamtza here, but let's say they choose that route. But I wonder how much PR or spin they could have done, because they're worried about these things, that you can bring a blemished animal, that you would be killed for bringing a blemished animal, but they could have spin.
Well, I think the edge sheker is the Bar Kamtza problem, that he's conspiring to try to get people killed. So from a standpoint of Torah-itic Jewish jurisprudence, I was about to say Jewish prudence, which is an interesting mix there. You would want to say, if somebody's conspiring against someone else to try to get them killed through false testimony, then that subjects that person to the death penalty. It gets a little more complicated when you go, well, but you're using the foreign authorities to do this, and it's like, where does rabbinic authority end and where does Roman authority begin? We already have that question here too, because the whole premise of being able to put somebody to death would only really apply in a time when internal Jewish authority is at a high enough level that they could convene those courts and execute death sentences. And we have a lot of reason to believe that that was not the state of reality in which the rabbis lived, both prior to and following the destruction of the temple. Under Roman law, there were a lot of problems with trying to execute a criminal within under Jewish religious law. But I do wonder though, at what point we kind of have to, we can question certain twists in the story and certain premises of the story, but we have to sort of accept the story as it's related in terms of telling a particular cautionary tale about certain problems. And we mentioned this end cap that Rabbi Yochanan gives us, and elsewhere in Masechet Yoma, we're told one of the reasons for the destruction of the temple was not the meekness or the wimpiness of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas, but it was sinat chinam, that it was more broadly this problem where people were hateful to one another without a basis. And it sounds like that's a criticism of Hahu Gavra, our host. But we could also hear in it a criticism of Bar Kamtza, that there was something.
I think that
Bar Kamtza's,
I think that's really what it is. I don't think before today I thought about it that way, but as we've gotten more into the text, it's been really enlightening for me. I thought it was the party host's fault, but he clearly there was something. He knew Bar Kamtza, and he had issues with him. And as we saw the way that the rest of the story progresses, and by the way, even though the story continues about the downfall of Jerusalem, all that stuff, Kamtza and Bar Kamtza are entirely out of the picture. First of all, we never see Kamtza, ever.
Right.
He's off screen entirely, and he's entirely out of scene. And then Bar Kamtza, he's done his damage because this thing doesn't get offered, and then there are issues with the Romans and so forth. And then they literally go out of the picture, and the ball's gotten rolling. But Bar Kamtza's done his damage. It's really his. I really believe after our conversation today, it's Bar Kamtza who's the one who's fostering the sinat chinam, that he just ratchets things up, that escalated quickly. Well, that was him, and it's all the rabbis didn't stop him. Oh, clearly they're against the emperor. Oh, let's just burn it all down. He's super upset. He's unnecessarily unhappy. He's unnecessarily angry. That's sinat chinam.
Yeah.
Versus the party host knew that Bar Kamtza is socially and emotionally toxic to have around. He doesn't even want to have him at his party, not even to sponsor the whole thing. You need to get out. You are inherently problematic. And ultimately, we even see Rabbi Yochanan's criticism of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas for not even wanting to have him executed for the incredible damage they've done to the entire nation, the entire country. So you can understand much better when we go back to this eating and drinking, this initial banquet that kicks everything off. If you have someone who's that toxic, not only emotionally and socially, but even politically and geopolitically, then I'm on team party host, Hahu Gavra.
Yeah, I mean, I see that. It's funny because I want to say, I want there to be some kind of a redemption for Bar Kamtza, like that. I want to leave the door open there, but it seems like we don't really have that option based on the way the story shakes out. The one thing that we could maybe,
I think one of the last nails in the coffin is the way that he causes that blemish. He's just trying to be mixing things up. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's right. It's all very purposeful, and he's knowledgeable enough about the law, right? He's knowledgeable enough about the laws of sacrifice to say, this is going to be a problem. This will invalidate this animal. And it's all very premeditated. Although, on the other hand, it's premeditated, but he doesn't think about how it's going to impact him. Like the fact that ultimately, this is not good for his future. It does harm to his entire people. It does harm to his community, but he's separated himself from his community. He's put himself in a place where that doesn't matter to him.
It's a Pyrrhic victory.
Right.
It ends in fire.
I do think I've been thinking a lot about, working on doing Musar study with some of my congregants, and we talk sometimes about, can we condense or can we collapse certain midot, certain character values or character qualities, character traits into larger ones, like into a larger basket. And one basket that I think contains a lot of stuff is the basket of restraint. That within the concept of restraint, you have patience, you have a restraint of ego, of the kind of concept of holding back yourself, not being too selfish. You can you even have humility as part of your restraint. It leaves room for other people. It gives honor to other people. Lets other people step up and do things and experience kavod and experience all sorts of of social approbation, and that's there. And then also, and this is very relevant to the context of eating and drinking, is restraint in terms of one's appetites, in terms of being not overindulging, of not taking advantage of a situation. You come into a party that your friend is hosting, and it's got an open bar, and there's hors d'oeuvres, and they limitless, and you sit there and you stuff your face all evening, and you drink up all of his wine and all of his liquor. Like, that's not a great way to treat your friend. So to say nothing of whether you might wind up then losing your restraint in other regards, right? You might say too much. You might say things you regret and do things you regret. But that, this story is actually interestingly about that balance between exhibiting enough restraint and not exhibiting too much restraint. That you don't want to. You want to be able to hold yourself back, to hold your temper better than Bar Kamtza did, to hold yourself back from angry actions, but also you want to be able to act decisively when there's a need to do so, better than we saw the rabbis acting with. So it's like a tightrope there.
Yeah. Rabbi Ferro, this is really great to have you join us. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and l'chaim.
L'chaim.